a lot of issues get brought up when we hear about essence energies. And I'll tell you where I'm located at. I'm located in Texas, and I go to parishes around this area. You never ever hear about that. But then I have my brothers or sisters will come up to me and they'll tell me, William, I hear about them, friends that I have that are Eastern Catholic, and they talk about essence energies. But what is that? So, Dr. Goff, what is it when we talk about that? The essence energies distinction. What is it? And as a Catholic, can you hold to that?
Well, answering the first question is a bit easier, but it also depends on how, I guess, you define the essence energies distinction. So as a Catholic, one certainly can hold to the distinction between the essence and energies, and one can even affirm a kind of real distinction between essence and energies, assuming one does not violate the other philosophical and theological truths of divine simplicity and unity. So yes, one can hold the essence energies distinction. Now, with respect to the distinction itself, that becomes a bit more difficult to pin down, and I'm not sure there's scholarly consensus on what the nature of that distinction is metaphysically, and it's difficult to define from within the understanding itself now, or from within the position itself, if one just sticks with St. Gregory Palamas alone, because it's not quite clear what he means by that. But I think, roughly speaking, what he means is, or what he intends to do, is to affirm the difference vis-a-vis creation between God in his essence, which is infinite and absolutely transcendent, and thus incomprehensible and inaccessible qua essence. And what I mean by that is that it's impossible to participate directly the divine essence as infinite, and thereby it would follow that it's impossible to comprehend the divine essence qua infinite, because simply that is transcendent to any finite power, and there can be no finite power amplified to an intensity or to a pitch of absolute infinity. And so what he wants to affirm, though, is that even though there is the incomprehensible and absolutely transcendent God in his essence, there also is the fact that God created. Not only did God create, but God also enters into communion. Not only enters into communion or covenant with rational creatures, he divinizes them, or in the more Greek sense of the term, he creates or he establishes a process of theosis, wherein the creature actually is participating in the divine and becoming really like the divine. And I think perhaps later on we'll be able to go into this more, but I think what then the distinction turns upon is the reality of creation and the reality of divinization or theosis in the creature. And so how do we then move from God's infinite, inaccessible essence as infinite and as absolutely transcendent, and a true act of creation, and then theosis? And so he develops an understanding, in his understanding of the Greek patristic tradition. I know there's debate about this, about how deeply rooted he is in the Greek patristic tradition in terms of pure exegesis, but I don't want to adjudicate that. I want to just stick with how I understand his purpose. And his purpose is to say, well, there is a distinction because of the fact of creation and incarnation. We know this. There must be an eternal distinction in God between his essence as infinite and those perfections, or what he calls energies, by which he, or through which, or in which he creates and elevates to a supernatural order, or divinizes the creature. And so he says, basically any kind of manifestation of a nature, even ad extra, is through some sort of quality, power, perfection, or energy that nature must possess. Otherwise, that nature couldn't manifest this. But it's actually by dint of the very manifestation of these actions ad extra that we come to know that God has these energies, and that these energies in some way must be eternally manifesting as a condition for their temporal manifestation. And so he then says, well, these perfections or energies that are manifested they are able to be manifested, and so they can't be identical to the infinity that God is in himself, in his essence.
Right.
But nevertheless, they're eternal and they are divine, so they also must be God. And so I think he's trying to come up with an understanding, a theological understanding that preserves both the transcendence, but also the creativity and freedom of God, as well as the immanence of God in creation, as well as in recreation or theosis. And so these energies, then, his energy of love or charity, or the creative energy terminating in a given kind of thing, like a dog, a cat, or a tree, all of these are manifestations of various sorts of perfections that he must have eternally. And having those eternally and manifesting them energetically eternally, because he is all knowing and all powerful, however you cash that out, he must then possess these energies as distinct from the infinite essence itself, and also in some way distinct from each other, such that they can manifest ad extra without implying that the divine essence itself, as infinite, is somehow becoming a creature. And so I take then his distinction is simply to preserve the intelligibility of creation, but also the possibility of creation as such, and then more importantly, the recreation through theosis of the rational person being transformed in Christ. And so I think that's the basis of the distinction. Now, a lot is made of the question or the status of the real distinction between essence and energies. Now, clearly, I think he's trying to affirm something stronger than what is called a distinction of reason, or a virtual distinction. And that's something that the mind brings to an object that is really in itself unified and doesn't admit of distinct parts. You might think of a sphere or a red ball. A virtual distinction would be holding that ball with a certain orientation, and I'm already lapsing into a falsification of sphericity. But let's say you're holding the ball in one position, and you say, well, this is the front of the red ball, and thus there must be a back of the red ball. And that's to help you understand the whole concept of sphericity, but also the orientation of the ball being held in this particular position. But there really is no distinction in itself between the back and the front of a sphere. So I'm bringing this distinction to help me better understand, in my finite and complex modes of understanding, how this ball relates to me here and now. And so I think St. Gregory Palamas is saying the distinction between essence and energies, and then between the energies themselves, is stronger than merely bringing it post hoc or post factum to this. So let's say God creates, and then there's the creation of a tree, a dog, a river, and a person. Well, he would say there are distinct energies and ideas, or logi, to use the term of Saint Maximus, that explain how God knows and creates and wills those items ad extra. They're distinct in themselves, and they're distinct eternally.
Now, let me just for the audience to know, you were talking about Saint Maximus the Confessor, I believe, right?
Yes.
And
Did
what
I
is
say Saint Maximilian?
No.
Okay.
You're definitely correct there. The logi. How would you define that?
I would define the logi as I understand St. Maximus defining them. And this, I'm no expert in St. Maximus, but I do read him with appreciation. And he defined the logi as the eternal good wills, or the eternal pre-volitions of God. And what I think that means is that these are items that God knows distinctly as mere possibility. But then when he elects to bring those into existence ad extra, to represent him in creation or in the economy of salvation, they take on the status of logi, because they're in a sense earmarked or designated for existence in an ontological order of priority, but also in a chronological order of priority through the course of history. So I understand the logi basically as those things he chooses by his own goodwill, and through their rational structure, they have intelligible content, but then as willed, they then have a certain kind of existential connotation or orientation, whether in fact or in future. And interestingly, St. Bonaventure, quoting Dionysius, who Maximus quotes for that definition,
Right.
He quotes Dionysius to the same effect with the exemplary ideas. The exemplary ideas are not just mere ideas of possibles, those things that could exist that are not contradictory or contrary to real existence. They're actually those ideas that God wills to bring in creation. So it has this existential and, in a sense, moral or final causality,
Yeah.
as opposed to mere quitative, intelligible content. And so that's how I understand the logi, as basically those items willed by God to exist outside of himself.